Africa Prime, brought to you by Jamison's Select Reserve.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Prime right here on CNBC Africa, and still with me is Tsietsi Mokhele, the CEO of SAMSA. Now, we know that Greece is a very big player within the shipping industry, and it's quite fascinating that it's still a very big and dominant factor. When I see some of the targets that you're mentioning here, it is really about fleet management. It's about taking a piece of the overall market share. Are you planning to challenge Greece at any point and challenge China? I mean, what kind of scenario do you foresee, perhaps not in the short term, but in the longer term down the line?
Yeah, in the shorter term, if you look at the Greek model, it's a model that's very effective.
Are you planning to mimic that?
You can form partnerships with the Greeks in certain elements, because they are more into the ownership, but they don't do the operations. They own, put it out there, others charter from them, and then they utilize that fleet. Within the BRICS environment, if coming back to issues of China, for an example, there is an agreement between ourselves and China within the BRICS partnership that we are going to be assisting one another in our own industrial development, because they've got challenges, we've got challenges of our own. They're looking for commodities out of our economy. And there's no rule that say, because China has grown fastest during the recession, more than any other country has benefited from the recession, yeah, from a shipping perspective. But we are saying to them, we're not even asking for counter trade. There is space for South Africa. There is space for the Chinese. The bilateral agreements will allow space for those that are nominated by our own economy to take goods to China. So it's not an issue of challenging the dominance of others. It's just to have a significant portion of what is readily available as a market. And I'm looking for to build a registry of about 300 ships as almost what would be required to sustain all the strategic goals that we have. Anything above that will be driven by the private sector itself.
How many ships do Africans actually own at this point?
There are ships. In fact, I was pleasantly surprised. Recently, I attended a meeting of African Ship Owners Association in Ghana about a month ago. And Ethiopia doesn't have a coastline anymore. They own ships, about 9 ships. Seychelles is just purchasing the 6th ship in Seychelles. You go into Sudan. Sudan has got...
Don't tell me Sudan has ships.
It's got ships.
That's amazing.
Now, if you take those, there the discussion was about their condition. Yeah. To then say, how then do we recapitalize the fleet they already have, support it better in moving forward? Because the poorer the economy, the more difficult sometimes it is to keep high quality vessels on the fleet.
I mean, you've obviously done the maths and you've seen, what the economic, agenda could actually be, and the pros and the cons. Give us an indication of how you've worked out the risks and how you've planned for potential risky scenarios.
And that's one of the strategic issues that we need to deal with as the reason for having our own fleet. You must see the insurance cost on vessels that are supposed to be exposed to those regions. Africa as a whole is now deemed a high-risk area, not only in Somalia, but off the Gulf of Guinea as well. Benin, yes, with Nigeria and others, there have been a few incidents of hijackings. And sometimes the insurance costs borne by the consumers in South Africa are unrelated to the amount of exposure these vessels have to bear whilst on those markets. So if we had our own fleet, we could actually mitigate that, carry the risk ourselves. If we want to equip them better, we could equip them better, put more armed guards on board, put more armed guards on board, so that we keep the prices subdued at the level that is competitive. But we don't have control over that. Somebody says, for me to bring goods to you,
it's dangerous.
Africa is dangerous. I'm putting 30% markup on my insurance.
But you understand how to price risk far better being in Africa.
Being in Africa, but you can't convince somebody over whom you have no influence. You just know that you need the goods, but you can't control.
Another interest, let's talk about safety. Let's talk about, hijacking and pirates and the fact that we're starting to see an increase thereof. Also abandoned ships. We've had one, an incident recently in South Africa as well. What kind of role do you plan to play? And how do you, foresee this, issue going forward? And have you actually seen more of an increase in ensuring that safety is key?
That's one of the issues that, as an economy, we've got one of the most capacitated economies in managing security, in managing safety. But we happen to be in an area that is redlined to say that region is Africa and therefore. Some of the impacts that we are absorbing have nothing to do with our level of capacity. I was just saying yesterday that We respond to about 40 distress signals by ships every day, every month as SAMSA, 40. Out of that 40, maybe about 10% end up where we need to intervene. And only once in a while we end up with a ship on our beaches. 40 years ago, South Africa was the first country that had standby tugs to assist vessels that are passing. Those Smith & Mandla vessels that we're talking about that are the salvage were the biggest in the world, the first technology that was introduced. So as a national economy, the capacity of South Africa to provide safety, manage and assist others is massive. Just two other factors to give you. 30% of world crude production is ferried around the Cape. 30%.
30% of crude
30%
production
of total
globally.
Crude, global crude comes around the Cape. How many tanker incidents have we had? You didn't forget. You don't know how much oil is being transported along our coastline.
And is that, a function of the fact that the ships are very healthy, the vessels are healthy, or is it because we just really know how to mitigate factors?
We just know how to mitigate factors. We've got infrastructure. We've got aids to navigation for guiding ships. We've got infrastructure that can see the lighting, the charts. Our maps are all up to date, and therefore the risk of picking up an incident in our coastline is very low. On any day when we take a snapshot of ships along our coastline, they run into about 1,900. So the coastline is bearing so much risk. But if there's no development by that economy, it means we are putting the risk on the back of the South African taxpayer. Because in terms of international law, the reason they allow you to own sea land, we've got 3 times sea bigger than the land size of South Africa. The only reason the UN allows countries to do that is that those countries must show they can provide safety and security on the ocean side. We have approved that. But the one thing nobody can push you into is to develop that sector. The trick is always make more money out of your oceans.
So we've overachieved on the safety front, but we've underachieved on the profiting from this. Absolutely.
Which means that we're beginning to put money into something where we're not beneficiating our economy.
With regards to ships, I know a lot of ships come here, and please, the word escapes me, and obviously you're the expert and I'm not, water is taken in by a lot of the fleet and then dumped on our coastline, and then obviously that being replaced by commodities. I'm not sure what that is.
It's called ballasting.
There we go.
Yes.
That is also creating a lot of danger, because then that creates a lot of drama within the ecosystem. Is this something that you're focusing on? Is this something that is a bit of a concern for you, and how do you look at that going forward? I'm
glad to observe that South Africa was one of the first countries when the global ballast water system was introduced. We were one of the first pilot sites. And when the technology was approved, when the new standards were approved, one of the first companies to get international accreditation was a South African company in ballast water. So we did a pilot study in Saldanha. So we're in the forefront, actually, in terms of the management of making sure that the foreign marine species are not carried in the water that's carried by ships into our waters. So there, I think South Africa is doing fantastic work. Our scientists are on the ball on that one, including the authorities. Illegal fishing, this is also another big issue. Illegal fleets, illegal vessels with illegal paperwork, and us being, obviously, it sounds like a beacon of good standing when it comes to safety. What is your prognosis within this space, and have we seen an increase of this, and what role does South Africa play? What we need to sort out as South Africa, I think foreign encroachment into our oceans is not our biggest problem. We've got adequate technological capacity to track and monitor our oceans. We've invested a lot. We've got some naval presence. We've got the coastal management fleet. The government fleet is heavily invested. So the foreign encroachment by foreign players into our waters is not the biggest problem. When illegal fishing is normally reported, is by the illegal fishing by our own people, who sometimes illegal fish above the quotas they have and try to sell this foreign. And there are very particular species that are in danger of that. And I think that's what we need to strengthen. But the police services have not been very active in fishing. That's why there's a bit of a gap there. So I'm not overly worried. But Africa as a whole loses a lot of money due to illegal fishing. But South Africa, I think our fish stocks and fish grounds are well protected. Tsietsi, I must say I'm very delighted that you're such an approachable man, because when I read where you studied,
It kind of got the fear and God in me, because given the fact that you studied in the Soviet Union.
Under the communists.
And I think 1987 to around 1992, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. You were talking about it earlier, that South African universities are not offering maritime studies. I'm sure back then it wasn't very different. 5 years, in the Soviet Union, you came out speaking Russian, and did you become a whole lot harder as a person? So tell us about that personal experience.
It was a bit of a shock to the system.
Yeah.
But
did you have to toughen up, or are the Russians very tough?
We had to toughen up. Firstly, the weather there, I mean, getting down to -31 is unimaginable.
Must have been hard.
Is unimaginable. We left, I flew out of Angola. It was the middle of summer in South Africa. We're just coming into summer actually, and then when we land the other side, it was just, winter was starting, September, October. And the first year was, you felt like just staying in your room. But I think one thing that I learned there is that where people, our struggle was a very purposeful struggle. There was enough to draw from the vision of one day being a free people. And to study under conditions where you are a persona non grata in your own country. You can't say, I'm studying so that I can go back to my country and participate with the skill that I have, was the most difficult part.
Because it was completely unknown. You didn't know what was
I didn't know
in store
what I was
for
going to do
South
with the skill.
Yeah.
You just have to try and be the best that you can, study harder than everybody else, try to get the best results in the school, but you're not sure on the day of graduation where you're taking this qualification to. So that was the only more difficult thing. But coming to understand the Russians and the Soviets and learning from them, I realized that patriotism is a very necessary ingredient if you're going to build a very strong economy. Because I've seen, when the Soviet collapsed, I was there. When Gorbachev was overthrown that night, I was there. So I've seen a failed state. I've seen when a government collapses what happens. I've seen the chaos. Flights collapsing overnight. We couldn't leave the Soviets for about 4 to 5 months because the network had just collapsed. The system, the whole global aviation system of the Soviets collapsed, and we were stuck for about 4 months. We couldn't leave. Money became scarce in the market. There was scarcity of food and all of those things. So coming back to South Africa, I just had one goal to say, should I make it alive back to my country, I'll do my small contribution to make sure that my country is successful and it never experiences what I'd experienced in some of the countries that we've been to.
It's an unbelievable story.
So that may be what drives me sometimes in trying to make sure that my country is successful.
Tsietsi, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
It's really
much appreciate for your time. Thank you
Thanks
so much.
for the opportunity.
That was Tsietsi Mokhele, the CEO of the South African Maritime Safety Authority. From me, Eleni Jokos, thank you so very much for joining us on this edition of Africa Prime.